Okay, cool. Sorry about the late start. So we'll begin with an acknowledgement of country, as we're in affiliation with the university. So Wisdom and the Enneagram acknowledges and pays respect to the traditional custodians and elders of this nation, past, present, and emerging. Further, we affirm the continuation of the cultural, spiritual, and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. For those of you who aren't already on the app, there's a new sort of university communication app that the club is in partnership with called Group Tag. So if you want to be more connected and stay up to date with what the club is doing, just download Group Tag and just create an account there. Really simple. Did it myself in like 3 minutes. And that's all about that. So we're just continuing. This is the second part of something I'm calling learning Enneagramic fluidity through Phil, and I'll do my best to explain what those terms mean as we go along. So we're using type 4 as our example. In the last fortnight, we went over a brief introduction and some of these topics, and we'll just briefly give an overview of those again for those who weren't here, and just to come back to what we're learning about. So to my knowledge, oh, you have to read that. That's awful. Sorry. Why? I don't understand that. Really apologize about that. Enneagramic fluidity is an original term. I don't know that anyone else is using it. And I'm just using it to refer broadly to this transformative structure of the Enneagram. So what I mean by that is that it's a symbol that's structured in such a way to delineate and sort of mark the ways that every individual from their particular personality can grow and expand as a person, and leave behind constraining defense mechanisms and things that they've picked up through childhood and through trauma and so on that have kept them in a particular way of approaching the world. Yes, so transformative structure of the Enneagram as a psychospiritual personality system and a symbol for holistic spiritual practice. And type 4, commonly known as the introspective individualist or romantic, among other common monikers that get thrown around. So we'll touch on some type 4, strung between type 3 to its right and type 5 to its left, situated within the heart or feelings center, where it represents as a personality a negative, melancholic personality in response to this separation from its more essential nature. So it's quite a, again, I'm sorry that you cannot read that, but I'll try to piece it out for you. It's quite a broad profile. You've got, the motivations driving how the personality is formed in the first place, how it operates and moves through the world, what that looks like as a character, like trait structures, defense mechanisms, the physical causation of the personality and its particular condition. And then you can go deeper into more general to like even existential psychology about it. Yeah, and then you can move into areas like where you start talking about virtues, what it looks like for the personality to become more and move beyond its constraints. And for type 4 in particular, that looks like equanimity. So arriving at a kind of emotional balance from where in the past it's been quite, perhaps quite turbulent or quite self-loathing. There's a lot of frustration and unrest in itself. And so as the type begins to mature and grow as a person, there's a kind of equanimity that can be released. Cool. So last fortnight we looked at some trait structures in brief. We'll walk through a few more of those. We'll touch on those again, defense mechanisms and so on. Etiology, so that's referring to the term kind of has to do with how something comes to be, like the way it's formed. I could pull up I'll pull up the Google dictionary definition for you, so I get this right. But that's sort of the gist of what etiology is all about. It's a more scientific term. So the causal or set of causes or manner of causation of a kind of condition. And I think it's just used more broadly in this kind of literature to refer to the personality. So trait structures. So this is from Claudio Naranjo. He's a Chilean, so from in South America. He was a Chilean Enneagram teacher. This is from his book, quite a psychological piece of literature, Character and Neurosis. I just found this as a PDF online, so you probably do the same. I have referenced all of this at the end of the slideshow. So some fundamental trait structures for type 4, so envy. So fundamental to the neurosis of this type, when I say neurosis, I'm talking about personality and overdrive, sort of personality without any kind of awareness or when there hasn't been any growth taken place. It's just the personality at face value, at average, at sort of status quo. This envy is fundamental to the neurosis of 4, and essentially means a kind of longing, a deep sense of longing and sort of almost an emptiness in the self that has negative connotations as they try to seek out things that will fill that gap up. And it can kind of look like an envy when they see, oh, that person or some class, they might have envy a particular class, they have something that I don't, why am I flawed like this, deficient? You know, and it's flavored differently for every individual. And then so this is tied in with this idea of a poor self-image, the feeling of void in the self, which generates the envy, notions of inadequacy, self-denigration, and so on. So it's not particularly pretty, but this is what we're dealing with when we start to deal with a personality that hasn't, you know, learned to love itself and sort of mature and grow through different experiences in life. Sorry, I'll just okay. Emotionality, because it's in this heart and feelings center, and all types, of course, are comprised of all 3 centers, but this is where 4 falls in this more emotional image feelings center. So with 2 and 3, it's neighbors on the Enneagram symbol, which I need to probably pull up at some point so it makes sense. There's a highly developed plastic capacity to role play. So this kind of is dealing with the idea that as an image-oriented type, they look to someone that they can emulate to kind of find a sense of self. Modulating the expression of feelings. And in type 4, this in particular looks like a kind of intensity. There's an emotional intensity to it. It may be directed inwardly. It may be more of a brooding intensity. It can be an outward. It can be anger. It can be being flamboyant. And like there's this competitive arrogance as we start to get to more angry or more transmitting types, more projecting types, can exist along with this competitive arrogance, can exist along with and in compensation for a bad self-image, and can present, quoting Naranjo here, as the victimized role of misunderstood genius. And when we get to the examination of Megamind, it'll start to make sense how all these traits fit his profile, so to speak. Pardon me while I... Right, cool. So quoting from Naranjo, continuing with Naranjo's work here, it's quite psychological. So some of it's a little bit, you have to make what you can of it. But this concept of introjection, so I think we kind of have in society a general idea of how projection works, where there are parts of ourselves that we are either unaware of, or we only have a minimal amount of awareness. And so we instead of integrating them and accepting them as part of ourselves, we project onto people that we see as antagonistic to us in the world or in our environment. So that's projection. Then introjection is this complex psychological strategy or structure where there's an internalized rejection, often of an unloving parent. So that is to say, can be either or both unloving to the child or to the child and to themselves. So they're seeing the parent, act towards the parent is clearly not loving themselves, being self-denigrating, and they sort of internalize that. That seems to be part of what goes on in the four's formation as a personality through childhood. And so in that projection is an expelling function, whereas introjection seems to extend the sense of self into intimate relationships and internalizes that kind of what it's picking up around it. I don't understand it fully. I'm sort of just making sense of it as I go along myself. But I think there's a general thread that can be tied together, that there's a kind of negativity, a deficit that's being picked up and perceived by the four, that's being internalized as a self-image, and that's maintained as this from then on as this kind of if two is kind of like this false hyped up positivity, then four at the other end of the emotional spectrum is kind of this overemphasized deficit negativity in the self-image. And then three would be kind of in the middle, where the feelings are all ignored so that it can get on with life and be successful, often at the expense of its own authenticity as an individual. To get on with four. And so introjection, to go further with that idea, there's a kind of turning against the self. Again, this negativity idea, taking in a self-hating parent or other important object in its environment. The consequence of this, not only taking in that, and it's a bit vague, but not only taking in that self-hate, it's also turned against of someone else. It's also the self turning against the self of the individual who's doing the introjecting. So there's that person is clearly at war with themselves. I'm going to take that in and turn that onto myself. I apologize. This is a bit more of the murky side of it, and it's sort of, you just sort of have to make sense of it as you go. But yeah, this thread of internalizing a negative self-image is pretty consistent throughout. So etiology. So for our purposes, etiology has to do with the constitutional, that's to say inherited, so genetically, and causative, formative, how the personality is formed from childhood and beyond, elements converging in a personality structure. In other words, the physique and other genetic attributes may contribute to or even set off the formation of personality in the psyche. So everything's involved, body type, genetics. But yeah, I won't say much more about that because that's sort of a broad thing. In the case of type 4, frustration in childhood may emerge as discontent or the longing that we talked about before in adulthood. And that may be maintained throughout this process of childhood to adulthood. Early experiences of abandonment are often the case in type 4. This can be rejection or feeling that they were worthless through some experience. Some experience made them to feel that they weren't valuable or worthy in and of themselves. Often there are experiences of suffering, pain, abuse, competition with siblings, or later disillusionment with a parent when coming to realize, oh, actually they weren't involved, they weren't there for me, they weren't valuing me in the way that I had originally seen it. So it's going to be different for every individual, but those kind of experiences are part of the personality structure of 4. Something that's commonly touched on and talked about is that 4s tend to kind of express their suffering or needing as a means of attracting attention. Not necessarily true of every 4's experiences, although that can be part of the makeup. There's a kind of wanting to be pursued. And so there's a kind of exhibiting of, I'm flawed, I'm needy, will you come and love me? But that's going to look, may not even necessarily be the case. And it's going to, and in the cases that it is, it's going to look different, you know, across cultures and so on. Some may not even be aware of the suffering until adolescence or beyond. And furthermore, all behavior is dependent on personal development and self-awareness. So if the chronic pain, the suffering of 4 is residual, it's from the past, this is where we start to talk about, you know, ways that we can outline what's going on and we can start to overcome and move beyond that. If that's, you know, being held onto, that it's the mourning over the past, over the suffering, over the gap, the void, the hurt, the cloud of sorrow, the dwelling upon that can trap the one suffering in the suffering. And so to go back to what we talked about last fortnight about the basic motivations of the emotional passion and then the mental fixation, which kind of feed off each other. So in this case, if that suffering is the emotional passion, then the fixation is the dwelling on it in moods. And so in that cycle, the person in the suffering can trap themselves in the suffering by dwelling on it in their mindset. So, you know, where can we move to beyond that? Well, support and love for oneself needs to be cultivated in place of self-loathing and sadness. I think that's pretty obvious. I think as we mature, you know, we can start to see these parts of ourselves and start, you know, little by little, incrementally learn ways, you know, to actually give love and support to ourselves so we can move through life and find happiness and find what we actually need rather than what we're looking for in our sorrow, perhaps, as force. So it's universally apparent that it's you know, in all the literature and all the examples that type 4 has a particular affinity for beauty and refinement, and manifests it through their manner, speech, dress, conduct, work, etc. So beauty is a big thing for 4. You know, it shows up in their art. It shows up in the way they, I think, often with language, choice of words, and I think they have a particular predisposition to reveal to the rest of the world the importance of beauty, whereas others might not be able to see it. So understanding 4 to be a type with image troubles, so to speak, they're in this image quadrant. Self-support, and when we're talking about self, that's the reality of me, I, as an individual traversing multiple transformations across a lifelong process. It's not just a static, fixed image. Like, so if the way that 4 gets trapped as a personality is wanting to just be, you know, define itself as this one fixed thing, so I can have this image and that's me, and I know who I am, and I can refer back to that as I go through life, then self-support is realizing that I'm moving through these transformations through life through a process. And so support for that process can help get us out of this, this boxed in identity, which is true for all personality types, but particularly with 4. You know, they want to curate this very specific image. And I think that has a lot to do with how they can be trapped in negative feelings. So understanding 4 to be a type with image trouble, so to speak, self-support is equivalent to the degree to which a person can disidentify with either an unnecessarily idealized or harmfully deprecated or, self-hating self-image. Both of those extremes are not going to be for the best for that person. If, as Naranjo puts it, envy functions to fill up a felt or perceived absence of self or individual worth, then the equanimity and discernment can develop with maturity, time, growth, and experience, and can blossom into a more true love for oneself and for life, really. So that's a lot of weighty stuff there. There'll be plenty of time where people can ask questions, and I'll try to explain things in a bit more detail. I apologize if it's a bit condensed. And now, how do we tie this all into to a film character? Oh God, that really is terrible. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. I should have been more prepared for that. Okay, so Megamind. If you haven't seen it, sorry for the spoilers. A brief overview of the plot. An alien, has to leave his planet because it's getting destroyed, and he comes to Earth to sort of find his purpose, and he sort of goes from bad to good, and in the end becomes the hero. But throughout, we see a very full personality, intense, emotional, misunderstood genius. These all apply to Megamind. He's a prime example of our Enneatype 4. And so, okay, at this point, I do need to pull up an Enneagram symbol because otherwise this won't make sense. Is everyone here somewhat familiar with what the symbol looks like? Not really? Sorry, that I should have included one in the PowerPoint itself, but I can pull one up. I can pull one up now. I think the best way to do this will be through this website. Go. And I'll just share my screen and we can walk through that for a bit. What I need to share my screens at? Or no? Just turn on screen share? Yeah, I'll just do that when I pull this up. Here we go. Just show me the symbol. Oh, about. That's what I want. About. Okay, there we go. Share the screen. This one. Oh, I don't know that I can keep recording if I share the screen. That's fine. No, I can still record. Okay, cool. So sorry about that, guys. So when we're talking about 4 to 3, so as we can see on this, there we go. So 4 situated here. Here's our heart and feeling center. Just briefly, we have body or instinct or gut up the top, heart and feelings and image over here, and then our mind and thought activity types over here. And what you learn as you go deeper into your research is that every person is comprised of all 3 of these centers, but they sort of have one that's core to them as a person, as an individual. So a 4's situated down here. Its neighbors are 5 and 3. And so the line to 3 to this admirable achiever, what that is demonstrating, and which we see in the Megamind film, is that Naranjo sort of describes it as 3 is 4 kind of satellites around 3, around this, what would you say? It wants to present itself to the world. It's, again, this image thing of look at me, look at the ways in which I'm special. Let me showcase this to you so that you will find me interesting and you will validate me, acknowledge me, so on and so forth. And then the neighbor, the 5, it's moving across from the heart into the head, whereby the 4 refines itself intellectually through finding particular niches in literature, in art, where it can make itself special and stand out. So it's then we have these sort of, I kind of call these minor lines, and then 4 also has lines 2, 1. I mean, it's all interconnected, but in particular, 4 has lines 2, 1, and 2 as well, which I call major lines, but we'll move on to those in a bit. So that's a brief overview of how those work. And we can return to that later. Now, how do I stop sharing? Right. Cool. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying the 4's line to 3. So 4's line to 3 represents their craving for attention, admiration, and success, especially as a special, uniquely gifted individual. By the way, none of this is a criticism of the type or any of the types. It's just trying to give a profile of what it looks like and how it operates in the world, and how it can be more than that, and not just limited to self-defeating habits for anyone. So in the process of integration, becoming healthy and complete as a person, or more complete anyway, the line to 3 can also, at that point, represent activity and progress measured by positive standards of achievement, beyond the really harsh, rigid rules that 4 sets for itself to be this special creature. Well, actually, I won't spoil it any further. And then the line to 5. So this is where we see Megamind's criminal genius. Represents their thirst for artistic and intellectual refinement. They turn inward, in a manner of speaking, focusing on improving their minds and honing their talents for wit, self-expression, originality, as well as creating an interesting conceptual realm that they can pull from. And at times can become, as they try to be special, can even be a little esoteric. So Megamind harnesses the full potential of his mind to devise grand plans of villainy and mayhem. And this is why he's nurturing this self-image to be bad, because that's, he's realized I can be special in this way. And so I'll be this. And now we start to get into these, what I call major lines. So these are commonly talked about as lines of integration and disintegration. So it's kind of as the person beyond the type is doing better or worse in their health, in their environment. So you can kind of think of it in that way. So 4 moving to 1, it's becoming more organized, balanced, equanimous, more peaceful and, what would you say, consistent in its way through life, especially emotionally, beyond the kind of turbulence, which we see it becomes more turbulent as it moves towards 2. That's one way of thinking about those lines. I think beyond that, there's a bigger picture going on, where it's a kind of this line of 4 to 1. What we're seeing is a realization. The 4 is realizing some kind of ideal, some kind of good that it's, seen it can achieve beyond the mere image that it's locked itself into. So 4's line to 1 can also, in this grander scheme, represents their heroic journey, their archetypal heroic journey from emotional turbulence and this kind of distorted longing, this, I'm going to try to fill up this gap in ways that might not be good for me, but that they what would you say, reinforce that I am broken, so I need to fill myself up with this because I'm broken, and so on. It's this, the line to 4 is, it's moving beyond this. It's leaving that behind. It's disidentifying with that image in response. Okay, and realizing this virtue or this ideal as a free, that is to say, liberated from the constraints of its personality, expression of who it is as an individual and what it can do and what it realizes beyond what the image that it's made for itself dictates. And then in 2, so commonly explained as a move to unhealth, disintegration, where it, it can become more involved, a little more emotional, demonstrative in its kind of expression of brokenness to others, which looks different for everyone. 4's line to 2 uncovers, at minimum, their strong desire for love and acknowledgement of intrinsic worth. Beyond this, as a person integrates their full essential potential, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the substance, the substance and the quality that you have as an individual to become and do what you want to do, what you perceive to be your lot to do, your task, what you can do. As a person integrates this potential, the line to two marks an acceptance and realization of real substance. So we're talking about the emptiness of the four fields. At this point, they're starting to accept the self-fullness, the fullness that they really have as an individual, and demonstrating that in generous and benevolent action. Megamind leaps into the chaos to eventually save the day, acting completely altruistically and heroically to the point of sacrificing himself. This is the higher and deeper meaning of Four's line to two on the Enneagram symbol. And that's where that ends in terms of this part two. I just want to open it now. I realize I was talking about a lot of things, possibly a little too quickly, but I'm still learning all this myself. Does anyone have any questions that they want to raise?
Yeah, so just like the last slide, how like at the end, 99K today, that you were saying that when he was doing that was actually unhealthy?
No, sorry. I didn't mean to say it in that way. I think what I'm saying is there was a sense in which in the beginning when he what would you say? He decides to define himself in this self-image of being bad, being opposed to what the goody two-shoes hero is, and he was going to be special and refine his individuality in that way, and only in that way. As the movie progresses, he starts to realize there are all these benefits to being good, and we're seeing as that in that process that he's starting to disidentify with merely being image, and moving towards there's something bigger and beyond me that I can aim towards. Oh, okay. So in the sense that at minimum, like in this kind of very baseline way of thinking about it, yes, the line to two is the more emotional, becoming more.
Or am I just looking at it too like simplistic and maybe you're saying
no. It's very legitimate, but it's just sort of it's bigger than that. You can take it further than that. So if Four in health is becoming more composed, it's really starting to get a grip of itself and be everything that it can be, and start to he's going away from that mask. He's sort of taking off the mask. Right, exactly. So he's moving from a kind of narrowness to a kind of spaciousness as a person. He's expanding. Type
isn't necessarily destructive.
Not at all. No type is just this. There's no one type that's like a destructive force in the world. It's just no. The line, right. There's a sense in which that's the case. There's also a sense in which that's representing a sort of a heroic expansion into everything that life can be. So exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Was there anything else?
And so like with the envy thing, is that only to do with like siblings, like competing with siblings, and then also like competing with parents? Or is there like also just relationships and like everyone?
I don't think it's limited to anything in particular. And envy is a kind of general term. It may not look like, what we think of. It can. I'm not like, yeah. I'm not too, that's why I was trying to just give like broad overviews of these terms, because I'm not too familiar with like Freudian terms or so on. The way I understand it, there's some kind of internalized lack that goes on, and then that, that lack needs to be filled up. And so that's what the envy means. It's not necessarily like a jealousy as such. It may be like where it stems. Yeah, that's hard to say, and that's what the etiology from before was trying to cover. Like where does this stem from? Yeah, that requires self-examination. Like what have been my experiences? What have I gone through? What's happened to me? Yeah, I mean, if I had to say where it stems from more generally, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint beyond, you know, your own individual experience. Yeah, but otherwise, that's leaking. Sorry. That concludes a very brief overview of characters through the examined in a kind of enneagramic way in films. Thank you very much, everyone. So, Zach, that'll do us for now.